JFK International Airport, Terminal B. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, the kind of scent that clings to fluorescent-lit spaces where thousands pass each day. The loudspeaker overhead crackled with boarding announcements, baggage claims, and connecting flight calls. People shuffled, suitcases rolled, children cried, and the weary hum of travel filled the space. But in one corner of Gate 12A, silence began to spread. A silence so sharp it cut through the noise, pulling every eye toward a scene that no one could quite believe was unfolding. Olivia Graves stood there, her navy blue uniform pressed to perfection, every hair pinned immaculately in place. With 23 years of seniority, she wasn't just a flight attendant, she was a gatekeeper. And in this moment, she relished her role as judge, jury, and executioner. Her finger, manicured to a glossy red point, stabbed the air in front of a teenage girl no older than 16. Maya Brooks, quiet, poised, her boarding pass clutched nervously in her hand. "This seat isn't for people like you. How could you ever afford it?" Olivia hissed, her voice dripping with disdain, sharp enough to cut glass. Her words traveled across the entire terminal, silencing the chatter. People stopped mid-step, their heads turning, brows furrowing, phones slowly being raised. Maya blinked, taken aback, her voice trembling but steady. "My father bought it. He works in aviation." Olivia's laugh was not a laugh at all. It was a performance, an act meant for the audience gathering around them. She yanked the ticket from Maya's hand and held it up to the fluorescent light like a detective inspecting forged evidence. Then, with a theatrical flick of her wrist, she tore it clean in half. The pieces fluttered downward, two helpless fragments of paper descending toward the grimy carpet. Maya bent quickly, her knees nearly touching the floor as she tried to scoop them up. But before she could, Olivia's designer heel came down hard, crushing the ticket into the floor. "Nice try, sweetheart. I've seen this scam before. People like you don't sit in first class. You belong in economy, if anywhere at all." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The kind of gasp that comes when injustice is so blatant, so cruel, that people instinctively reach for their phones. Screens lit up, cameras recording every humiliating second. The heat of shame flushed across Maya's face. 300 strangers watched as her dignity was trampled beneath Olivia's heel. Some looked horrified, others looked entertained, but no one intervened. And Olivia? She basked in it. She tilted her head, lips curled in a smirk, feeding off the silence of the crowd, the glances of approval from a few passengers who mistook cruelty for authority. What she could not see, what her prejudice blinded her to, was the dangerous truth simmering just out of reach. She was not unmasking a scam. She was setting fire to her own career. She was lighting the fuse of a storm that would not only destroy her reputation, but ripple through the very industry she thought she represented. In that moment, Olivia Graves believed she was in control. But control is an illusion. And the reality was this: with a single phone call, her fate was already being rewritten. This is not merely a story about arrogance. It is not merely a story about prejudice. This is a story about how a single choice, a single cruel moment in a crowded terminal, can collapse an entire life. But before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because the stories we uncover will remind you that sometimes the smallest moments carry the most devastating consequences. As the pieces of that torn boarding pass lay ground into the carpet, the clock began ticking on the greatest mistake of Olivia Graves's 23-year career. The murmurs spread like wildfire across Gate 12A. Fingers tapped on screens as passengers zoomed in to capture the humiliation. A young girl, her dignity stripped before strangers. An attendant, cloaked in authority, towering as though she were untouchable. But beneath the clicking of cameras and the rustle of restless travelers, heavier questions began to stir. questions that clung to the silence, demanding answers no one present could yet provide. What deep-seated prejudice would drive a veteran professional to such a spectacular public self-destruction? How could a woman with 23 years of experience, a woman trusted with the comfort and safety of thousands, gamble her career in broad daylight over a cruel assumption she didn't even bother to verify? And then there was the girl, 16, barely old enough to drive. And yet, standing in the eye of humiliation, she held herself with a strange composure, a steel beneath her trembling voice, the calm of someone who knew she was not as powerless as she appeared. How does a teenager possess the poise of a seasoned CEO under fire? But the heaviest question of all came not from Maya, nor from Olivia, but from the single sentence Maya had let slip in her defense. My father works in aviation. Who is the man behind the curtain? The father mentioned only in passing, wrapped in understatement, as though his name alone carried weight too dangerous to reveal. What is the true nature of his influence, and what happens when that power is directed at a single individual who wronged his daughter? The passengers at Gate 12A could not have known it then. But the answer to those questions would shatter not only Olivia Graves's career, but also expose the dangerous fragility of arrogance in the presence of quiet, underestimated power. And with every second that passed, as the cameras kept rolling and Olivia doubled down on her cruelty, the reckoning drew closer. To understand the eruption at Gate 12A, you must first understand the two lives that collided there. Two women who had been forged in opposite worlds, yet destined to meet in a single catastrophic moment. Olivia Graves had lived her life inside the rigid walls of an airline hierarchy. For 23 years she had risen before dawn, pulled her hair into a severe knot, and buttoned her uniform with military precision. She knew every policy, every loophole, every regulation down to the syllable. She prided herself on being the gatekeeper of first class, the unseen arbiter who could decide, with a single glance, who belonged in the soft leather seats and who was to be sent back to the cramped rows of economy. Colleagues described her as thorough, no-nonsense, unyielding. But beneath those polite adjectives hid something far more dangerous, a deep skepticism that often blurred into prejudice. She believed she had an instinct, a sixth sense for spotting frauds. In reality, it was a mask for biases she had never confronted, and in the safety of her uniform, she believed she was untouchable. Meanwhile, in another world entirely, a world of glass towers, private jets, and gated estates, Maya Brooks was being prepared for a life far beyond what most 16-year-olds could imagine. On the surface, she lived a life of privilege, the best schools, private tutors, summers abroad. But privilege in her household was never divorced from responsibility. Her father, William Brooks, was not simply an aviation executive. He was the owner of the airline itself, a billionaire whose name was rarely in the press, but whose decisions shaped the skies thousands traveled through every day. To him, wealth was not an excuse for indulgence, it was a weapon of precision. And he raised Maya to understand that weapon, to wield it carefully, and to never mistake silence for weakness. Yet for all his power, William Brooks lived by one iron rule: privacy. He guarded his life with the vigilance of a fortress. His name rarely appeared in tabloids, his movements were discreet, and above all he kept his family firmly in the shadows. To the outside world he was a distant figure of influence, but to those close to him, he was a man whose greatest vulnerability was his daughter. She was the part of his life he never paraded, never risked exposing. From him, Maya learned the subtleties of power, how to read a room before stepping inside, how to maintain composure even when under fire, how to let an opponent exhaust themselves before delivering a single decisive blow. He taught her that influence is most dangerous when it is quiet, when people underestimate it, when it hides behind humility. This is why, at 16, Maya carried herself differently. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She didn't demand attention. She had been taught to watch, to listen, to pick her moment. To Olivia, Maya was just another teenager, one more wide-eyed passenger to be managed. What she could not see, blinded by her own arrogance, was that Maya was the single person in the terminal she should never have provoked. Because this wasn't simply a teenager with a ticket. This was the daughter of the man who owned the plane, the uniforms, the gate desk, and even the paycheck Olivia Graves depended on. A daughter whose protection was her father's greatest vulnerability, and whose humiliation was about to unleash a storm Olivia could never have imagined. Their worlds, so different and so carefully built, had been set on a collision course. And at Gate 12A, under the harsh fluorescent lights of JFK, they finally met. The humiliation at Gate 12A was complete. Olivia Graves stood tall, chest heaving with smug satisfaction, the shredded boarding pass crushed under her heel as the gate's fluorescent lights cast their harsh glow. Passengers whispered, cameras rolled, and for a moment Olivia believed she had won. She had, in her mind, defended the sanctity of first class. But what Olivia could not see was that Maya Brooks was not broken. Her silence was not surrender. It was calculation. Maya's voice was quiet, almost too quiet for Olivia's ears when she asked, "May I use the restroom?" Olivia, flushed with self-importance, dismissed her with a wave. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Don't take too long. Security will want a word with you." And so Maya walked away. But the moment the restroom door swung shut behind her, the performance ended. She reached into her small designer bag and pulled out a sleek phone, dialing a number from memory. It rang once, twice, and then a calm, measured voice answered. "Miss Brooks, this is Daniel Pierce, your father's executive assistant. What do you need?" Maya's tone was steady, sharpened by quiet fury. "Daniel, I need everything you have on an employee. Olivia Graves, flight attendant. Terminal B, JFK, Gate 12A, 23 years of service. Start pulling files. I want disciplinary actions, passenger complaints, HR reports, everything. And Daniel," she paused, her voice colder now, "I'm not asking my father to handle this. I'll handle it myself." There was silence for a beat, and then the assistant replied with equal precision. "Understood. But I'll need to verify what exactly happened to you before I let this go further. I'll have the CCTV pulled immediately. Stay where you are. We'll have eyes on Gate 12A in minutes." When Maya returned, her composure was unnerving. She walked back into the gate area, her face pale but unreadable, as though she carried a secret no one else could touch. Olivia smirked, interpreting her calm as defeat. "Well? Call your little aviation father? Or was that story just as fake as your ticket?" She sneered, eliciting nervous chuckles from a few who hadn't yet realized the danger Olivia was in. Maya stopped directly in front of her. Her voice was level, her gaze piercing. "I don't need my father. I have the truth. Tell me, Ms. Graves, how many passengers have filed complaints against you that were quietly buried? 14? 15? How many times have supervisors warned you for prejudice before the paperwork mysteriously disappeared?" Olivia froze. Her confident smirk faltered. What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice sharp but unsteady. Maya pressed forward, her tone never rising, every word cutting deeper. 6 formal discrimination complaints, 3 federal warnings. Do you deny it?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Passengers shifted, cameras tilted, people leaned closer to catch every word. Olivia's face flushed crimson. "How did you? That information is confidential. Who the hell are you?" Maya tilted her head, her voice almost pitying. "I'm the girl you thought didn't belong in first class, the one you humiliated in front of 300 people. And I am the daughter of the man who owns the very airline you work for." The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia's mouth opened, then closed, words failing her. She looked around desperately, as if the passengers she once performed for might leap to her defense. Instead, they were all filming. Still, she tried to salvage her power. This is ridiculous. A teenager doesn't have access to employee files. You're bluffing. You think you can scare me with lies?" At that exact moment, Daniel Pierce's voice crackled through Maya's phone. loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Miss Brooks, CCTV has been secured. We have a full recording of the incident, start to finish. Your father has been notified." Olivia's eyes widened. Her bravado drained like water through open hands. She staggered back half a step, her voice rising in panic. No, this isn't happening. How did you get that footage? That's restricted. This isn't legal. Who do you think you are?" Maya's response was surgical. "I told you who I am, and I warned you. You've made the biggest mistake of your life. You didn't just step on a boarding pass today. You stepped on my dignity. And you're about to learn what happens when arrogance collides with truth." The passengers murmured louder now, the tide of public opinion shifting entirely against Olivia. She sputtered excuses, reaching for authority that no longer belonged to her. This is just a misunderstanding. You people don't understand what it's like, the scams, the fakes. I was protecting the airline." But the more she spoke, the smaller she became. Her words, once sharp and commanding, now sounded desperate, hollow, stripped of the authority she had so carelessly abused. And with every word, Maya simply stood there, calm, unshaken, the embodiment of a storm waiting to break. And break it did, because as Olivia tried to defend the indefensible, a sudden stillness fell over the gate area. Heads turned toward the terminal corridor where a man in a tailored suit was approaching, flanked by two silent aides. His steps were deliberate, his presence suffocating. Without a word, the crowd parted like water before him. William Brooks had arrived. The murmurs hushed into silence as William Brooks entered the gate area. He did not need to speak to command attention. His presence was gravity itself, pulling every pair of eyes toward him, forcing the air from the room. Olivia's shoulders straightened instinctively, as though her body knew what her mind refused to admit, that the storm she had unleashed had just arrived. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He walked calmly, deliberately, every step a quiet declaration of power. Behind him, Daniel Pierce carried a slim folder, Olivia's career, distilled into ink and paper. William reached his daughter first. He placed a hand on Maya's shoulder, steady and reassuring, his only display of warmth in a sea of ice. Then his eyes found Olivia. "Ms. Graves," he said, his voice measured, almost gentle. But in that gentleness lay something far more terrifying than anger. Inevitability. Olivia opened her mouth, desperate to reassert her authority. "Sir, this is a misunderstanding. This girl, presented a fraudulent boarding pass. I was doing my duty to protect the airline, to protect—" William raised a hand, silencing her mid-sentence. He did not glare. He did not sneer. He simply looked at her, as though studying an insect under glass. "Protect the airline?" he repeated softly. "Is that what you believe you did today?" He took the folder from Daniel, opened it, and began to read, not in haste, but with surgical precision. Olivia Graves, 23 years of service, 14 disciplinary actions, 6 documented complaints of discrimination, 3 federal warnings, multiple passenger grievances settled quietly to avoid litigation, and today, he closed the folder with a soft snap. Today, you decided to humiliate a paying customer in front of hundreds of witnesses, and in doing so, you humiliated the very airline you claim to protect. The words fell like stones. Olivia's face drained of color. No, that's not. Those were all misunderstandings. I was cleared. I've given my life to this company. Her voice cracked, rising in desperation. She looked to the crowd, but the crowd was no longer her ally. Phones were still recording. Faces stared back with cold judgment. William's gaze did not waver. You saw a young black woman, and you assumed criminality. You saw a child, and you assumed weakness. What you failed to see was the truth. And worse, you failed to see what it would cost you. Olivia shook her head violently, her words tumbling out in panic. She can't have those records. She's lying. This is confidential. She's just a kid. She doesn't understand what she's saying. You can't do this to me. William's tone sharpened, but his volume never rose. Ms. Graves, you are standing in front of the person whose very existence you tried to erase. My daughter, Maya Brooks, the child you ground into the floor beneath your heel. The gasp that moved through the crowd was like a wave. Olivia staggered back a step, the realization clawing at her face. Your daughter? She whispered, her voice trembling. Effective immediately, William said, turning to Daniel. Terminate her employment, collect her credentials, escort her from the premises. This is not just the end of your time with this airline, this is the end of your career in aviation. Olivia lunged forward, her composure shattered. You can't do this. 23 years. I've given everything. Please, Her words broke off when Daniel stepped beside her, expression unreadable, and held out his hand. Your badge, Ms. Graves. The moment stretched. Olivia's hand shook as it reached for the lanyard around her neck, the symbol of her career. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the crowd. But there was no sympathy there. Only the cold, unblinking eyes of justice. As she handed it over, another voice cut through the tension, trembling, urgent. A man who had earlier stood proudly beside Olivia, nodding at her cruelty. He stepped forward now, face pale, sweat shining on his temple. Mr. Brooks, let me just say I never condoned this behavior. This is unacceptable. It's disgraceful. Whispers swept through the crowd. He's not just a passenger, he's a board member. The man's attempt to distance himself only tightened the noose. William's eyes flicked toward him briefly, the smallest trace of contempt in his stare. Your silence condoned it. Your nods encouraged it. And your presence here as a director of this airline makes you complicit. There will be an audit. Every HR practice, every buried complaint, every cover-up will see daylight. Consider this the end of silence. The man's face collapsed, his attempt at survival crumbling under the weight of exposure. Olivia, meanwhile, stood frozen, her career bleeding out before her eyes. 23 years dissolved in 23 minutes. The uniform that had once given her authority now clung to her like a costume she no longer had the right to wear. Passengers watched as security escorted her away. Phones tracked her departure, capturing her fall in real time, broadcasting her disgrace to the world beyond Terminal B. And all the while, William Brooks remained silent, his hand still on Maya's shoulder, the calm eye of the storm he had summoned. The reckoning had begun, and Olivia Graves, once the gatekeeper of first class, was now locked out forever. The gate area remained frozen in silence long after Olivia Graves had been escorted away. The echoes of William Brooks' words still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Passengers, airline staff, and onlookers alike found themselves asking the same unspoken question. Did that really just happen? Phones buzzed as notifications streamed in. The incident was already spreading across social media. The video clips, Maya's calm defiance, Olivia's unraveling, William Brooks's merciless dismantling, were racing beyond the walls of the terminal, carried to millions in real time. By the time Maya and her father were escorted to a private lounge, hashtags were trending worldwide. Justice in the sky. Maya Brooks. Gate 12A. The airline's stock dipped before recovering sharply. Investors, recognizing William Brooks's hand, knew that decisive action had been taken. But beyond the numbers, something deeper shifted. Inside the lounge, William sat across from his daughter. His face softened now, the battle over. He looked not like the titan who had just ended a career, but like a father seeing his child's resilience illuminated for the world to witness. You handled yourself with strength, he said quietly, his tone stripped of the steel he had shown outside. Stronger than most executives I've ever seen. You didn't need me. You never have. I am proud of you. Maya, still reeling, blinked back tears but refused to let them fall. She had stood her ground. She had faced humiliation, racism, and cruelty head-on, and emerged not broken, but unshaken. Yet the story was not over. Across the airport, Olivia sat in a small holding office stripped of her uniform, her ID badge now just a piece of plastic on a desk. She stared at it as though it might breathe life back into her, but it didn't. Her phone vibrated with messages, but they weren't support. They were rejections. Airlines she had worked with, networks she had leaned on, colleagues she had known for decades, all were severing ties. Her name was radioactive. Her record, permanently stained. She was no longer a flight attendant. She was a cautionary tale. And for the first time in her 23 years of flying, Olivia Graves felt the true meaning of being grounded. Meanwhile, passengers who had once remained silent in the face of everyday prejudice now spoke up. The ripple had spread. Gate agents were suddenly more cautious, more professional. Flight attendants reminded themselves that their authority was not a weapon but a responsibility. And somewhere in the shadows of the industry, board members and executives whispered nervously, "If this could happen to Olivia, what buried sins of ours might surface next?" William Brooks knew this ripple would not end at Gate 12A. He knew it would echo through every corridor of the industry he helped build. But in that moment, watching his daughter sit straighter, stronger, he realized that the legacy he had spent a lifetime creating was safe, not because of wealth, not because of power, but because of the unbreakable resolve in her spirit. He placed his hand gently on hers. "This isn't just about one flight attendant," he said. "This is about every time someone thought they could humiliate you, diminish you, erase you. Today, Maya, you didn't just stand for yourself. You stood for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. That will be remembered far longer than this scandal." And with that, the Brooks family left the airport not as silent victims, but as the spark of a story that would forever be remembered as the day a girl turned humiliation into history. As for Olivia, her final view of the runway, engines roaring, planes soaring toward horizons she would never touch again, was not freedom. It was exile. And for everyone else at Gate 12A, the lesson was clear. In a world where silence once protected the powerful, sometimes all it takes is one voice, unbroken, to change everything. This story forces us to confront difficult questions about justice, power, and perception. What do you think? Was Olivia Graves's punishment, losing her career, her reputation, and her entire livelihood, a justified consequence for her actions, or was it too severe for a moment of prejudice? Could you have remained as composed as Maya Brooks did under that kind of intense public pressure and humiliation? We want to hear your perspective. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for tomorrow's plot.